Brazil, Russia, India, and China make up the so-called BRIC countries. Goldman Sachs coined the term a decade ago to identify the world's fastest-growing economies. It predicted the countries would be 4 of the top 6 economies by 2030. Through the first decade of this century, Goldman Sachs says BRIC countries accounted for over a quarter of the world's growth in gross domestic product. In Shanghai, we talked with Jason Henderson from the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City about the trade stages those countries are going through and how that affects nations such as the U.S.
Initially, in terms of the trade stages, they have to have rising incomes as they emerge from a low-income country to a middle-income country. As their incomes rise, they increase their consumption of meat, and oftentimes they do it by importing meat from other countries. At the same time, then they start building up their own livestock sector to satisfy their meat demands, and that in turn over time leads to lower levels of imports. The one real challenge is that most countries haven't been able to increase in their livestock sector and the crop sector at the same time. So when they build their livestock sector, they tend to import grains, import soybeans for feed usage. And then ultimately over time, after a couple of decades, countries have tended to be able to compete in export markets and export livestock products, primarily meats, but also grains.
And Brazil is one of those countries. Brazil is now competing with the U.S. in terms of exports, corn, soybeans. Well, what about Russia, India, and China? Where are they in the stages?
Russia appears to be fairly along in those stages, more like kind of like a stage 3 situation where they're expanding their internal livestock consumption and production to the point that the import share of consumption is starting to fall. So they're relying on domestic sources to meet their actual protein needs. Right now the big question is are they going to be able to develop their crop sector to satisfy not only their feed needs but also their food needs, and will these gains be large enough that they're going to be able to compete on the market, on a global market? So right now they're at stage 3, looking at how to satisfy their own internal demand.
And India and China, we know China is a major importer specifically for U.S. soybeans.
Right. China is a little further back in the development process. They're still having rising in terms of imports, both in terms of crops, but also in terms of livestock. And so the question with China is they're working really hard in terms of developing their livestock sector. Will they be able to do that to satisfy some of their own livestock needs and their meat and protein demand? But will they have the water and the technology to be able to produce the feed for that sector?
So for these 4 countries, or these 3 countries, I guess, it's possible that they don't get to that 4th stage.
It is possible. I think one of the biggest questions that you have in terms of all the BRIC countries is, do they have the internal resources to be self-sustaining in terms of food production? And so a lot of it comes down to technology. Do you have the right technology that's able to boost your yields? And it comes down to water. Are you more efficient in water usage, and do you have the water resources that it needs to satisfy agricultural production? Because agriculture uses 70% of the world's water.
Let me step back to China for a second. And I think there are 2 schools of thought on China when it comes to importing soybeans, because they're so far ahead of everyone else. Mm-hmm. Some say it's great because we know China will always be there, and the other side may say that's good, but what if they go away? The next closest is so far down.
Right. I think that's one of the risks, is right now we have this window of opportunity in terms of exporting grains, soybeans, and probably corn is going to be next. The challenge is going to be how is their soybean production or their crop production going to evolve over time? And I think that is really the center of the debate. Are they going to be able to adopt those technologies to allow them to feed their own livestock sector?
With the countries we've been talking about, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and the trade stages they're in to get to a possible position to export, are they economic threats to the U.S. agriculturally?
I think there are going to be some competitiveness challenges that agriculture is going to face from those BRIC countries. Brazil, they're exporting a lot in terms of on the crop side, but their livestock sector is an emerging export threat. And then I think going forward, you have to look at the Baltic regions in terms of Russia, also the Ukraine, which is a former Soviet Union country. I think that region in there is well positioned to be very competitive in terms of crop and livestock markets.